Welcome to the Hope Unlocked podcast. I'm Kristin Kurtz, your host. I pray this episode is like a holy IV of hope for your soul. Please help me welcome Tom Anderson to the show. I'm so excited to have him here today. We've had such a great conversation post or pre-recording. I just believe that you're going to hear so much goodness from him, and I know that he has quite a story to share, and just the ways he's been led even to this place today for him to share. So, Tom, thank you so much for being here today. Before we get into your story, would you be open to sharing a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much, Kristin. I wanted to say first that I really, really appreciate what you do and also the title of your
Oh, thank you.
podcast. Hope is such an important part of people's lives.
Yeah.
What hope really says is there's a dream within
Mm,
someone.
yeah.
And when I know I've read your website that
Mhm.
one of your favorite verses is the God of all hope.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so the God of all dreams, he's the one that plants dreams in
Mhm.
us. And
Mhm.
one of those dreams is just to be whole and,
Yeah.
to know that we're just have intrinsic worth, to know that
Mhm.
we're significant, to feel safe.
Yes.
But then there's also specificity in those dreams. And my wife and I have lived long enough
Mhm.
not only to see that God has fulfilled those dreams, but
Mhm.
also how he's done it. And so I think we're going to have a great conversation, just
Yes.
examining not just my
Yes.
story, but just again, if God is a God of all hope,
Mhm.
he's the one that has not only planted in our hearts, but he's also wants to bring those things out. And as he told Adam to be fruitful, multiply, fill, you know
Yeah.
that I think the expansiveness of what God's put in us is in seed form. And so
Yeah.
how do we do that? How do we hold on to that while life seems like it's imploding? So
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
married 53 years now.
Congratulations. That's
And,
amazing.
we just talked even about 2 months ago how that our relationship went to another level.
Oh,
And we just, again, we don't, we're just bumbling and walking through life, but
mhm.
there's a greater ease, greater joy. We're still facing things that old people face,
Mhm.
but it has really been amazing to see the God who is relationship just really take two bumbling kids
Mhm.
when we were 19 and 21 and messed
Wow.
up, and how he really has brought us to a place of wholeness, not only in our relationship, but also in
Mhm.
our lives individually, because you can't really have a whole relationship unless you're whole.
Yes. Well, would you mind taking us back? I don't know that I've asked anybody before to like kind of take us back. You've been married for a long time, and you must like I thought you got married when you were like 14 because you don't look like
Yeah.
you're
Well,
if I'm doing my math right, are you 74?
5 this year.
75.
Yeah,
Wow.
there's no
You
gray
guys
hair
take that
yet.
in.
There's no
Take
gray
that in.
hair. I don't slobber. I don't have narcolepsy.
Okay, that's good.
I actually get up and down doing landscaping, and I don't get dizzy. So God's really
Amazing.
kind to both of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I tell people, we were married when we were 13, and she's my second cousin. Um, but yeah, and then she just rolls her eyes when she hears
I
that.
bet.
Yeah,
I bet.
yeah,
So how
yeah.
did you guys meet?
So it's interesting. The one dream that I've had in my heart, even from high school, was to have the perfect marriage.
Oh,
And I thought that all I have to do is get married because I'd be the perfect husband.
good. Okay.
And so anyway, during high school, I tried to go out, no one bit. And then when I got into college, I began to date, but then I got hit with acne. I mean, it wasn't just pimples; it was my face was beet red, my
Oh,
back and my chest was beet red, and I I was a messed up kid, and it just drove me further into a shell. What I did really well during high school and college, and most of even after I started walking with the Lord, was to hide. And so, anyway, Nancy and Nancy was the first girl that actually took an interest in me. She was a junior in high school, and I was I think, a sophomore in college.
okay.
And I was working at the hospital in the kitchen after hours to, just clean. And Nancy was working in the kitchen as they called them candy stripers back then.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I was told by some of the older ladies that she was interested in me. And so
Oh,
I had the courage to ask her out. So we had about a 2-year on and off relationship.
Okay.
And, I was, again, I was looking for love, and she was meeting that need. And then in my senior year, she said that, she knew what she wanted to do, and it wasn't be with me. She wanted to go on to college and become an interior decorator. And so we broke up until 2 months later, she called me and told me she was pregnant.
Oh,
And so for me, I was getting married, so that
yeah.
my dream was being fulfilled, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And for Nancy, it was anything but a dream.
Mm,
Nancy's maiden name is Trap, and she
mm,
was absolutely trapped in life. And
mm,
so, but at that point, we within a month, I saw the marriage wasn't going to last, and this
mhm,
is a big part of the story,
mhm,
because one reason I think this desire for a perfect marriage was in my heart, was I
mhm.
did not see it in my parents.
Okay.
The dynamics in their relationship, my dad was really didn't I perceived that he did not like me. I mean, he loved my brother because my brother was cut out of the same cloth. I
Okay.
was more in the background and quiet, and like I said, hid. And my brother and my dad were more out there. They were
Okay.
salesmen, and type of salesman that you go into a restaurant and they call you sweetie, and you know
Oh,
you know
yeah.
so anyway, but what would happen in the home is my
Mhm,
dad would make some sort of declaration.
mhm.
The kids would cause a commotion. My mom would tell everyone to shut up. My dad would go sulk.
Oh,
So fast forward, we're a month into our marriage, and I'd come home and say, "Hey, Nancy, let's go take a walk." She says, "No, I'm not going to walk." I said,
mm,
"Nancy, let's walk." "No, I'm not walking." "Nancy, we're walking." "I'm
yeah.
not walking," and I go sulk. And I
Oh,
had a Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker dream scene experience where Luke kills Darth Vader in the dream,
mhm,
takes off his helmet and sees himself.
mhm,
And if you would have told me up to that point that I was like my dad, I would have said no way. But at that moment, there was just an awareness that I was like my dad, and
wow.
the dream that I had for this perfect marriage
Mhm,
was absolutely being blown up. Because again, I thought all I needed to do was be married because I would be the perfect husband because I'm kind, I'm a
mhm,
yes person,
mhm.
and so that was really so. At that point, I said, God, if you're real.
Mm,
Now, I grew up Lutheran. I went to
okay.
Lutheran grade school, high school, college, so
Okay.
I knew the Bible. I
Yeah.
believed the Bible. I had a relationship with the Lord, I think, but you never really know until you come to a place where you realize you don't know.
Wow.
And so I said,
Yeah.
God, if you're real. And I had a friend that I took some tennis lessons from I knew
Mhm,
he was a believer,
mhm.
and I knew that he was married, and I thought he had a good marriage. And so we called him up and we began a journey at that point. That was in the early 70s
Okay.
when there's a move of God happening right now among young people, but
Yeah.
then really a unique move of God. There's
Mhm.
a charismatic thing happened in all these different denominations,
Yeah.
and we began to really commit ourselves to the church.
Yeah.
Uh, but I would come home, and Nancy would be staring at a wall. She was looking back, she was clinically depressed
Oh,
because her dream wasn't being fulfilled.
okay.
And
Now, was she pregnant at that point
oh
then?
yeah, oh
Okay,
yeah.
so she was pregnant and like staring at the wall. Ever hear something on this show that stirs something deep, like a nudge from God that there's more? That's stirring. It's not random. I'm Kristin Kurtz, host of Hope Unlocked and the founder of New Wings Coaching, and I'm inviting you into a 45-minute unlocking session, a sacred space to press in, hear what heaven is saying, and activate your next bold step. If you're a trailblazer or kingdom voice ready to break free from doubt and live fully alive, this is for you. Book now at newwingscoaching.net/hopeunlocked for special listener pricing. You were born to live uncaged and unapologetically bold. Now back to the show.
Yeah, and even after that, she was staring at the wall because again, she was trapped in life because again, she was married to a fella who really wasn't going anywhere. I was initially just working with a college degree in a
Mm-hmm.
factory hauling magnets because I felt that that's what I can do. I
Mhm.
never pushed myself. In fact, I have been pushed, and I've been allowed myself to be pushed. And God has, over the years, well, I've spoken to hundreds of people at a time, both
Mhm.
in my career and also at church. But back
Yeah.
then, in fact, the first time I was asked to teach Sunday school, I actually fainted.
Did you
Uh,
really?
I really did. Yeah, I really
What?
did. I mean,
But when somebody asked you, you
no,
fainted.
no, no. When I was up there, I fainted.
Oh, okay. Not just the asking. Because I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
some people, like when they get asked, they're like, oh boy.
Yeah, well, I'm sure I was an old boy or two, but so for 8 years, we I go to work and I end up in retail during that time, and
Mhm.
again I was I'm pretty much an up person. I've always been more encouraged than discouraged,
Mhm.
and Nancy during that time was definitely more discouraged than encouraged. And we went to church. Back then it was church Wednesday night, Sunday night, prayer meeting,
Yeah.
and but again, what was really good, some things that really held us together, God for sure.
Mhm.
Our relationships, we really had relationships, and they knew we were messed up. In fact, we had some friends recently tell us that they never thought we were going to make it. But the other huge thing that really kept us together is we were poor. We didn't have options, and I
Mhm.
think that sometimes ends up being an issue with marriages as they face each other and realize that it wasn't what they thought, which
Mhm.
it's never what you think. Uh,
Yeah.
that if you have options, you sometimes can jump out of a relationship when God's actually using that
Yeah.
relationship. So,
Right.
anyway, just
Yeah.
coming back to the story. So, for 8 years, I would just come home. We'd be hanging on by our fingernails, and
Mhm.
Nancy would be staring at a wall, and I'd do what I could to serve her.
Mhm.
And one Sunday, we were sitting at the kitchen table. The kids were taking a nap. We were
Mhm.
playing some sort of card game. I don't know what it was. And
Mhm.
I was actually just feeling down that
Mhm.
day. And Nancy was down. And I said, Nancy, why don't we pray? And
Mhm.
so she flopped her hand over. And
Oh.
I don't know just what I prayed, but I do know that, and I've not had this experience since or even before, but
Mhm.
just from my belly,
Mhm.
this word came
Yeah.
out, and it was out of Isaiah.
Mhm.
And Isaiah 43, I believe, it says, "Consider not the former things." It came out pretty forcefully.
Yeah.
"Consider not the former things, neither remember the things of old. For
Mhm.
behold, I do a new thing. Now
Yeah.
it shall spring forth. Shall you not know it? I'll make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." I said, Nancy, do you feel that? No.
Mm.
And for a whole month, it got worse until Nancy one Sunday said, I'm done. I can't handle it. She
Mm.
went in the bedroom and came out changed. And we still don't know what happened, but somehow
Oh.
God stepped in. So fast forward about 3 months.
Mhm.
I know I'm talking here, but
You're good.
I'll
You're
give a
like,
pause here. But
yeah.
it's really important because
Yeah.
I think we go to places where we hear God speak something,
Mhm.
and then nothing happens, or worse, the opposite happens. So what the heck's going on? Well, a couple months later, we had a visiting speaker come through, and he asked the congregation this question. He said, "What does God do when you have a need?" And he wasn't talking about I'm hungry, or he
Mhm.
wasn't talking about it's just an existential need.
Yeah.
And we said, "Well, he meets a need." He said, "No, he doesn't. He sends a word." Then he
Mm.
tries the word, and then he
Mhm.
meets the need because he's more interested in building faith in your heart than meeting the need, even though he wants to meet the need. And so, as we look back on
Good.
that experience, God gave this word, and
Mhm.
it was a seed that was planted.
Mhm.
It was the promise to be held on to. It was the confirmation of the hope that was in my heart.
Mhm.
But then what happens oftentimes is that you know it seems like nothing's happening, or worse, the opposite happens. So what's happening during that time, and I'm sure we'll
Mhm.
talk about this in a moment, is the hope against hope stage.
Yeah.
We believe something from God, and
Yeah.
then we have to go through the hope stage where hope is actually released in us. And so really from that point, we began to change. Whatever was gripping Nancy was
Mhm.
off. She didn't know she loved me. She was doing life because this is what she had. We had two kids, and
Mhm.
I wasn't making much money even back then, And but God began to change both of us.
Mm.
And like I said, that was many years ago.
Wow. Like
I
what,
mean,
45 years ago-ish?
yeah, about 45 years ago.
Wow.
And and she's one of the most joyful people I know.
Oh.
It's remarkable. And so as I see this life, that I've had the privilege to look back on,
Hmm.
God really does plant things in our heart, and
Hmm.
and then we have to go through the wilderness.
Yes.
He makes a way in the wilderness. We want to see God move, but
Hmm.
we find ourselves in a place where we don't know how to get out. And but
Right.
that's a very place that God shows up. We want to be refreshed, but we
Mhm.
find ourselves in the desert. But that's the very place that God's going to meet us. And
Yeah.
so just holding on during that
Hmm.
time, I usually, when I'm talking to people, I'll talk about these two realities. We have the reality of what God said,
Yes.
and not just a general word. I mean, we have to hold on to God's nature and character, but I
Hmm.
think we also have to be attentive to His voice, because
Yeah.
he speaks to each one, and if we
Mhm.
don't recognize that, it's sort of like, I think, Samson just let or no, it was Samuel didn't let any word drop,
Mhm.
and but because that's the seed that's planted, that's the building blocks that God's using to really create something amazing in our life.
Yeah.
And so just holding on to that reality as opposed to the reality that we live on, because we all take a look at our small space and
Hmm.
wonder why.
Hmm.
But we have to hold on to
Yeah.
God, the God of all hope.
Yes. Yeah. It's that why question. Did you find yourself during that, 8-year period, asking God why?
I'm pretty. I don't know. I don't remember. I don't. We all do.
Yeah.
That's so many waves over the sand
Hmm.
back. But I think the bigger question I've been thinking about lately, and has been the "What about me?" question.
Mm.
And I think that the question that undergirds all questions that we have is, what about me?
Mm.
And we try to answer that a lot of different ways. Anxiety is
Mm.
actually answering that question. I'm not safe.
Mm. That's, yeah.
Depression
Yeah.
answers that question. I'm not significant.
Mm.
Or we go the other way and we try to really make things happen. We
Right.
have to be important,
Mm.
and so we have to step on people. So this "what about me" question, and we were talking about this prior to coming on. I don't
Hmm.
think the church does a good job of
Yeah.
really addressing that, because a lot of times what I hear, well, it's
Hmm.
not about you, it's about
Mm.
Jesus. And it absolutely is about Jesus,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
he doesn't say it's absolutely about him. I think about Adam.
Yeah.
The first thing he said to Adam was not, "Hey, it's about me, Adam.
Mhm.
You're
Yeah.
here to serve me. Here's the 10 best rules to live by.
Mhm.
Go
Right.
out and" no, he said, "Adam, be fruitful,
Yeah.
multiply, fill." Because
Yeah.
it's God's glory for us to be in the
Mhm.
spotlight. And as long as we're not trying to be in the spotlight,
Yeah.
you know, God wants us to shine.
Yeah.
And so the "what about me" question has to be answered in a way that really is settled in our heart, that I am loved. I
Hmm.
am I am significant. I am safe. And as those things are settled in our heart, then we can begin to, navigate life and do life without trying. It's not transactional anymore. It's just you just are, and you're being,
Yeah.
you're actually fruitful.
Yeah. Well, I love what you just said. I want to capture this too because it's very simple. And when you get a hold of this, it's like you just are. You literally just are. Like your operating
Hmm.
system is operating in a way that it was created to operate. And I love how, I found personally like it's come through the wilderness that this been has been discovered for me personally. But could you talk to us just a little bit more about, the church maybe not helping, you know, the congregation or the believers to really step into who they were created to be?
Hmm.
Because as both of us, we're discovering that we both have this common, like you gotta be before you do. Like you have to know
Yeah.
who you I like to say you got to know who you be before you do. So could you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
it is
and
to some it's foreign. It's like, well,
oh, it
I'm
is,
just
it
doing,
is.
I'm just doing, I'm doing, and doing, and then you run
Yeah,
out of
yeah.
steam, and then you're like, who am I?
Well, it's a good thing though. I mean, we have. I'm going to talk about Paul in a moment because Paul
Hmm.
is really, he's the one that had this revelation. It's no longer I but Christ. But
Hmm.
he also had the revelation that I know who I am. I know that I'm important in the scheme of things.
Hmm.
But I think with the church, the church is not good with both and we rightly exalt Jesus, but I think we look at God in a way that I call it the Allah version of the Christian God, where we have this beneficent, kind, uh, sovereign being that's on the throne, and there's truth in that, but a greater truth is we have this relational God, the Father and the Son, who've always loved each other in the atmosphere of the Spirit, and they've included me in that relationship. So I think where the church is really settled on is that we see the love of God as transactional. That
Hmm.
here's this broken person who is a sinner initially, and secondly, then he's a sinner saved by grace, and
Hmm.
he's needy, and God, because he loves, because his love is selfless, he's just going to love you. But that doesn't really say much about me.
Hmm.
But there is a truth in that. I'm not disparaging that,
Right.
but
Yeah.
when God has saved us, we are no longer sinners saved by grace. We are sons and daughters of the Jesus type. And
Hmm.
so when we think about this, the love of God, not as this transactional, not as primarily transactional,
Hmm.
but as relational. And because Paul said that he has the faithful God, the one who's faithful, has called us into the fellowship of the Son.
Hmm.
So with whom has Jesus been fellowshipping with forever? And what does
Hmm.
that fellowship look like? And so I think about the first chapter of Ephesians, where he begins to just go off and say these things which no one believes about themselves, you know.
Hmm.
And then he
Yeah.
stops. He's like, I got to stop. This is too much to take in. I'm
Oh,
speaking
yeah.
in a foreign language, so you got to pray that the eyes of their hearts be open, that they might
Mhm.
see again the hope of
Yeah.
their calling. And so this word hope in biblical terms is not I hope. It's the absolute assurance
Hmm.
that what God has called us into, He's already brought us into. And that's not only the being part, He's called us into a relationship, which I
Hmm.
call sonship. And again, sonship is not a gender term. There's a lot of Bibles that are now saying children instead of sons, but you have to define sonship through
Hmm.
the life in the person of Jesus, who is the Son.
Hmm.
And it has to be defined by a relationship with the Father and a position of authority in the cosmos. And Jesus obviously is over everything, where God's given me these little pea patches or these little gardens to manage.
Hmm.
So it's the same thing in smallness as he is in bigness. And as we
Yeah.
begin to see that, our sense of self changes. And
Hmm.
we're no longer this person that God has affection toward, but He's actually brought us into His
Hmm.
relationship.
Yeah.
And that's what's really changed in my life and my wife's life.
Hmm.
And as I try to talk to people, and it is hard because it's not normative Christianity.
Yeah.
Normative Christianity is a behavior, it's
Hmm.
morals, it's
Hmm.
discipleship, and all those things, without a doubt, are important. And
Right.
I don't think we can get to the being place unless we are doing and
Hmm.
come to the end of yourself. And so
Hmm.
let me share the story of where I came to the end of myself.
Yes. Thank
Because again, I said before that my my mo
you.
is getting people to like me by being a servant, by
Oh,
being a yes person,
okay.
and also just hiding.
Yeah.
If I'm
Yeah.
asked to do something, I'm involved in doing that. So even in my career early on, I was in retail, and I loved doing that because people
Mhm.
came in with a question, and I can answer the question, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But 10 years into our marriage, let's see,
Mhm.
12 years. So I have my bachelor's was in psychology,
Oh,
and
okay.
I thought maybe good stepping off point for getting away from retail was maybe getting into counseling. So I went and got my master's in counseling, unbeknownst to me at that point that I can make less money initially doing that than doing what I was doing.
Oh, really? Wow.
And we had kids in high school. So,
Oh,
but
okay.
anyway, but what was really life changing is when part of the program was I had to go through counseling.
Oh, okay.
And so I sat down with my professor, and he was an amazing man. And he would ask me a question. Then he would do one of two things. He would either take his face and put it on his chest with his eyes closed, looking down,
Mhm.
or he'd actually roll his eyes in the back of his head where I just see the white of his eyes.
Oh, wow.
So he'd ask a question, I just stammer and stutter. And this happened 4 or 5 times until I finally realized, now you might have seen that and said, "Hey, buddy, come off. What are you doing?" But for me, I stammered and stuttered, but I realized, and it was a moment of awareness, that
Mm.
I get my juice from people. So if you were engaged, if you were interested in what I was saying, boy, I was
Mhm.
interested. If you
Mm.
weren't interested, I would shut down.
Okay.
And
Oh,
when I saw that, I didn't really try to change, but I began to change.
okay.
And like I said, I'm really at a place here where I still like being in the background.
Mhm.
I'm still a servant, but
Mhm.
it doesn't control me.
Right.
I've confronted people. I was asked last year to speak in front of our church. We have 2 services,
Oh,
500 people on identity.
yeah.
And, and so I know this that God has changed me. And yeah,
Can I ask a question really quick?
yeah, yeah,
Okay, so the counselor, did he do that on purpose?
yeah. So interesting.
Just to like kind of see what your reaction would be, or tell
Well,
me more about that.
well, I've had a chance to
I
ask
just have to
him.
know. I'm like,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
really curious
But,
about that.
but 20 years later, I saw him at a restaurant. I sat down. I said, Dr. Harris, I have to ask you.
Yeah.
You did this. He says, yeah, that's what I do. He said,
Oh.
because I'm not here to fix you. You're the one that does the work.
Mm.
And so he was being a blank screen, and I was being projected on that blank screen. And
Okay.
that's how I interpreted, how I perceived it.
Okay.
And so what I saw of myself, it wasn't good,
Okay.
because again, we have these false pictures of ourselves,
Hmm.
and how those are exploded. I don't know what's the right word. How those are, we begin to see ourselves in a way that we thought we were okay, and we
Hmm.
realized we're not okay, and that happens a lot of different ways. But that was really a significant point in my life, because
Yeah.
from that point it began to change. And
Oh,
yeah,
that's amazing. And it's interesting that, you had to have a moment like that, and it's like we can look at moments like that in our life that seem, it's like, huh, that's very interesting, right?
yeah. Well, I think those moments are absolutely critical. I think what I've come to realize is that one of the greatest gifts God can give anyone is self-awareness.
Yes.
And Nancy can say, "Hey, Tom, you're a jerk,"
Oh,
and I was like, "No, I'm not." But
yeah.
if I see myself, if I have these moments where my
Yeah.
jerkiness comes out, then, and I think that's what. So in my book, I talk
Hmm.
about Peter. You
Yeah.
know,
Well, what's the name of your book first?
it's called From Sinnership to Sonship: The
Okay.
Story of Becoming.
Mhm.
Really is the story of how God transformed. First of all, the huge dream God's put in us, but also about how does God bring that into reality? How does God bring that to fruition?
Mhm.
And one part of it is self awareness. So Peter, the first time Jesus met Peter, it said that Jesus looked at him, and this word "look" in the Greek isn't just glancing. He
Mhm.
basically read Peter's mail.
Yeah.
He saw the best of Peter. He saw the
Mhm.
worst of Peter. right?
Mhm.
He saw
Mhm.
all of that.
Yeah.
And he said to Peter, "You're Simon, son of John, but you're going to be called Peter." And so what he was doing was not this parlor trick. I know your address, right? We know that happens sometimes
Mhm.
in Christendom. But he said, "No, you're Simon. You're just like your old man. You're
Mhm.
impetuous. You're a leader, but you're boastful. You're clueless. You shoot from the hip. You're just like your old man, but you're going to be like me because Peter is Petros, which is a small stone, where Jesus is a Petra, or the
Mhm.
huge boulder." And so
Mhm.
we see throughout the Gospels flashes of Peter, right? Flashes of brilliance. But
Mhm.
most of the time, we just see too much Simon.
Mhm.
We see him
Mhm.
correcting Jesus. We see him, yeah, again, just doing his own thing and
Yeah.
think. But it's interesting too, the elegance and the subversiveness of God.
Mhm.
If I was Jesus, knowing Peter's issues, I
Yeah.
would say, Peter, you're going to be a leader, but right now you're going to be cleaning the latrines. You
Mm.
know, but that's not what Jesus did.
Right, I
Because
know.
Jesus uses our own strengths against us, so he actually made him the leader. I think
Yeah.
Peter would have been the leader anyway,
Yeah.
but then fast forward
Mhm.
to the courtyard scene
Mhm.
where it says Jesus looked at him again, and this is the same word. This is right after, you know, Peter said,
Mhm.
"I'll never deny you."
Right.
And so again, he had this false view of himself. And
Mhm.
Jesus said, I don't think you really see yourself quite rightly, but when you're converted,
Yeah.
when you're converted, when this moment happened." So it says that Jesus looked at him and said that Peter wept bitterly. There was a breaking in
Yes.
him. There's a moment of
Yeah.
self-awareness that
Mhm.
he didn't realize. And
Mhm.
so, and again, I think just speaking to people out there,
Mhm.
there's moments where we realize that we're a fraud, and that's
Mhm.
the best thing that can happen. For Peter was probably at the lowest point of his life, but
Yeah.
Jesus said he's starting to get it. He's starting to
Mhm.
get it because it is we come into the Christian life. I'm sorry, I'm
Mhm.
talking a lot, but I'm just
No,
talking.
this is wonderful. This is your time to share.
We come into the Christian life, with the way with a sense of self that we protect and we project,
Mhm.
and the way we do life before we become a Christian is the same way we do life after.
Mhm.
We're personality driven,
Mhm.
whether it's diminutive or expansive. We have these natural gifts that are God given, but
Yes.
they're not broken. And
Mhm.
so what happens is our personality, our giftings control us. And
Mhm.
so God, with Peter, and I've seen this in Paul's life too, he
Mhm.
brings him to a place where he has to break those so that walking in the Spirit is
Yeah.
defined by not being controlled by your personality. So,
Mhm.
Peter and Paul both were hammers, right? Especially Paul was a hammer. Everything
Mhm.
was a nail to him, but at
Mhm.
some point he allowed himself to be hammered. And
Mm.
so
That's so good.
there was a transition. There was a moment of transition there, where again he found the grace of God. And
Mhm.
anyway, yeah.
Wow. So you've talked a lot about Paul and Peter, and I'm curious, do you find aspects of yourself in either of them? Because I
Um,
know it's interesting. I did it was like a biblical disciple personality test.
mhm.
And guess who came up for me?
Mrs. Peter.
Mrs. Peter.
Oh,
Yes.
right.
Yeah. How about you?
Well, no. I'm an anti-Peter. I'm an anti-Paul. I definitely lead, but I'm a follower.
Are you?
Um, yeah, but again, what happens is my personality controlled me. I was
Okay.
a yes man, and
Yeah.
so I did what I could to be
Mhm.
liked, to feel like people liked me. I did
Mhm.
what I could to control my world, and
Yeah.
I did that by serving.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter whether you're diminutive or you
Mhm.
know a type B or type A personality. There's so many different ways you can describe that.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Those things control us until they don't.
Yeah.
And once they don't, then you can be. And
Mm-hmm.
then you begin to realize that what God's given. So you can move in. For example, I can go ahead and I can be in the background, and I love being in the background. But if I need to step out on the stage, I'll step out on the stage. If
Mm-hmm.
I need to say something, I'll say something. Because it's really, I guess it's no longer I. I think
Yeah.
Christ really is living in me,
Yes.
and that's, I'm saying that humbly. And so right now I'm writing through the book of Jude, and it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The whole book, most of the book is about answering the "what about me" question, because it says love called kept. That's who we are, and that
Mm-hmm.
circles down to keep yourself in the love of God. But then once we know we're loved, called, and kept, once there's this sense,
Mm-hmm.
the settled sense of who we are, then we can think about others in a way that it's not transactional. We're not getting something, we're trying to get something from them, or not
Yeah.
trying to put something in them.
Mm-hmm.
But it says there's three different things, three different, there's some people that just don't know what's going on. So we have to address them in a certain way. There's some
Mm-hmm.
people who are teetering, and we have to address them in a different way. And there's some people who fall into the mud. We have to
Mm-hmm.
address them in a different way. But if we just have one way of doing things,
Yeah.
then then we're not going to be able to really be effective with the people in front of us.
So good. I love, I haven't read Jude for a long time, but can you say the three words again for
Yeah.
the
So
listener?
Jude's really been opening up to me, and that'll be a book shortly. I've been putting that on Substack.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
but it says, Jude starts by saying, "You who are loved in God the Father,
Mm-hmm.
called
Mm-hmm.
and kept by Jesus
Yeah.
Christ." So when you think of your three greatest soul needs, to
Mm-hmm.
know your own worth,
Mm-hmm.
intrinsic value, without having other people try to prop you up, even
Yeah.
though it's good to be propped up, it's good to be told you're special, but
Yeah.
to know that we really are loved by God the Father. I mean, and this love is not this dispassionate love. It's an intense. It's a
Mm-hmm.
stalking sort of love. It's a Psalm 139 sort of love, that God can't
Mm-hmm.
get enough of me sort of love. If we
Mm-hmm.
understand that, it doesn't make us proud. It
Yeah.
brings us to a humble energy.
Yeah.
But also then you have called, and called really speaks to our significance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another part of us that we really have to have settled in our heart, that because I don't know about you, but my life is really a lot of mundane things.
Mm-hmm.
I help vacuum here.
Yeah.
Is that important? It's definitely important,
Yeah.
right?
A lot of dishes. Yep.
Yeah,
A lot of
absolutely.
laundry.
And then kept really speaks to our feeling safe, being safe. And
Mm-hmm.
so even Nancy and I mean, we had never made a lot of money. As we look at our future, are we going to be safe? Yes, we are,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
we're looking. God's going to take care of that. So that's how
Yeah.
it starts. And he says, contend for the faith. And
Mm-hmm.
what faith is it? It's this. It's this knowing that we're loved, called, and kept is what we struggle with, because we
Mm-hmm.
don't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Life happens and we say, "Oh no,"
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
then at the end it says, "Now keep yourself." And he gives actually three different ways to do that. And after that, he says, "Now you can love people with God's sort of love." God's love is not selfless, because he
Mm-hmm.
does everything for his glory. His love is full of self-interest, and he's given us, he's put in with us also just self-interest. And as we're just giving ourselves to serve, I mean, that's really in our best interest. As I'm here serving my wife, that it's in my best interest.
Yeah.
And obviously sometimes we're doing the best we can and things still implode. But
Mm-hmm.
at that point, you just have to rest in God's faithfulness, unless God's really spoken something. And I know
Yeah.
with us, he really gave us a specific word. In
Did he?
fact, he's given us a couple of those. But yeah.
Okay. So, can I ask you, for those listening, we're talking about hope, we're talking about being, loved and called and kept. It's interesting. I guess I never knew kept was in Jude. Years ago, I used to ask the Lord for a word for each year. And in 2018, when I was going through like probably one of the most challenging years that I'd ever been through, of what I called unwinding from grinding and just basically
Hmm, that's good.
becoming, right?
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
learning how to walk again, a lot of transformation. He gave me the word kept. And I'm going to be honest with you, because years before I would choose words. It was like warrior and courageous and things that I was kind of like,
Hmm.
like, come on, girl, keep going kind of words. And he gave me the
Yeah.
word kept. And I honestly, I was like, God, that's really dumb. That's what I said. Like, I can't believe you'd give me that word because it was so different than years before that, right? And I guess I never knew, and you're just kind of awakening me today to the fact that that is in that sequential loved, called, kept. I'm gonna have to go into Jude and read that. But for those who are listening in who maybe don't feel loved, called, and kept, I mean, I talked to a lot of women in my journey, and I think just even that word beloved, right? Be
Hmm.
loved, be loved.
Hmm.
What would you say to them that they just can't grasp that? They can't grasp that they're called. They can't grasp that they're kept. How can they just even take some steps starting today as they're listening to
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
podcast to start
Uh,
leaning into that with the Lord?
Jesus, when he came, he said, repent and believe the gospel.
Hmm.
And repent means change your thinking, right? But the gospel has to be more than God's pulled me out of hell. The
Yeah.
gospel has to say that we are his beloved. The
Hmm.
gospel has to say that the dreams he's placed in our heart, God has is not only going to fulfill, but he already has fulfilled them. The one word a couple of years ago that really dropped in my heart was when Jesus was on the cross, he said, "It is finished." And
Hmm.
that has been really has changed my thinking, changed me, because what God is so coming back to what you're saying, the gospel is that God loves you,
Hmm.
and we have to first hold on onto that in faith. That's why Jude says, contend for this,
Yeah.
because it's we have this internal tape recorder or
Hmm.
digital recorder. We have a
Hmm.
default operating system that
Yeah.
tells us that we're not. And
Yeah.
so we have to say, we have to come and repent. And
Hmm.
again, I want to use that word in the softest of ways.
Hmm.
We have to say, my thinking isn't right here, Lord.
Yeah.
You say that I am your beloved in whom you're well pleased.
Hmm.
Again, reading Psalm 139, David's saying that God stalks him. God,
Hmm.
and so again, I don't. Can I say that I feel that? No, I don't feel that. But we're
Hmm.
not called to feel; we're called to believe. And
That's
and
good. Say
so
that again.
we're not called to feel; we're called to believe. And so I know we talked beforehand about the seed, and this is a seed that God is seeking to plant. So when you think about the parable of the sower, which is in each of the three gospels, right? The
Hmm.
parable of the sower is so important. And a lot of times we look at that as deterministic. Oh, I'm this soil or that soil. But when you
Hmm.
see it as the path to fruitfulness, the path of becoming, then the first soil is so important because we have these presumptions and these assumptions and these preconceived notions about ourselves. And some of those have been justified or have been solidified in life. We don't think we're worth much, and people don't treat
Hmm.
us right, right? Or
Right.
we've had things that really harden the ground. But we
Hmm.
have to take time to say, God, I want my heart softened. I want to really receive this gospel word that I am your beloved. Not just an object, but I'm a person you really love, you really imagined. And then the
Hmm.
second soil is the contending part where the sun comes out. In fact, in
Hmm.
Mark it says when trials come
Hmm.
because of the word. And so we're going to believe the word that God loves me, and there's a moment in time when that has to happen. We're going to say, Lord, I'm accepting what you said because
Hmm.
you said it. And
Hmm.
then during this time when it doesn't seem like it really is true, we
Hmm.
let our roots go down and we contend for
Yeah.
that belief system that we are the object of God's affection. And
Hmm.
then the next soil is where we begin to start walking in that, and there's going to be distractions. But
Mm-hmm.
again, as we address those three, and
Mm-hmm.
that's actually the story of Abraham too.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be a place where we're fruitful, and we know that we're loved, and we can love people, and not have this transactional view of life where I'm trying to get something out of people. So I'm
Yes.
loving my husband, and he's not loving me. So
Right.
so anyway, does
Mm.
that make sense?
Yeah, that's so good. I love, just the picture again of the soil. I just picked up a bag of Miracle Grow today.
Hmm.
And when I said that, was there anything that came to you, Miracle Grow? I do feel like there's just so many miracles that
Yeah.
he does. I mean, you look at just even a seed, look at the mustard seed, look at the acorn and how like the mustard seed is the smallest of the seeds. And I don't know how big the
Yeah.
mustard is. The tree like 10, 20 feet tall.
No, it's a big shrub,
Okay.
but it's a lot bigger. Well, I just think about one kernel of corn.
Yeah.
Uh, One kernel of corn within 2 or 3 generations is over 1 million kernels of corn.
Yeah. Isn't that wild?
So when God created Adam, and we have to really, I call Adam and Eve's story a meta story
Mhm.
because our lives fit into that story. And he first thing that God did, and I know traditional Christianity is not going to like me for saying this, but I don't care.
Okay.
It said that he blessed Adam.
Mhm.
And this word bless is barak. It's the
Mhm.
exact same word that David used, I will bless the Lord. And it means
Mhm.
to kneel down and honor. And
Mhm.
so we will never say that God worships us, but
Mhm.
guess what? God worships us. Because again, if you have this olive version of a Christian God where he's sitting on the throne and
Mhm.
he only is one to be worshipped, then you'll never really see who God made you. So,
Right.
there's a verse in Isaiah that says that my glory I will give to no other. And
Mhm.
so that verse is used as you better stay in your place because God is
Mhm.
God and you're not. And I'm not God,
Right. Right.
but I'm a
Exactly.
son, right? I'm a
Yes.
daughter.
Yes.
But Jesus said in his priestly prayer, says, the glory that you've given me,
Mhm.
give to them. And so we're
Mhm.
not other. And so the first thing God did was he knelt down and he
Mhm.
blessed Adam. He breathed into his nostrils. And the first thing
Mhm.
that Adam saw when he opened his eyes was this amazing being who was
Mhm.
actually centering all of his attention on Adam. And so where does this need to be the center of attention comes from? It
Mhm.
comes from God. But he's the one who's going to fill that need. And when Adam fell, obviously,
Mhm.
he was disconnected from the source. And
Mhm.
so he began to try to find his own center of attention fix.
Right.
But then again, the next thing he did was he said, be fruitful, multiply, fill. And so
Good.
he's saying, I like what I made and I want more of you. And
Mhm.
so if Adam stayed connected with God, he would have developed because he was made in his image. He was to
Mhm.
grow into his likeness. And
Mhm.
so Adam was put in a small garden
Mhm.
where he was to learn how to grow into his likeness and to become like the person he loved. And so
Mhm.
when Satan said, you can be like, if you take this, you could be like God, it was a
Mhm.
lie because he was already in his image. He was just learning how to become. And so, so that I just having that
Mhm.
mind shift is that, because we put ourselves down and so, obviously
Mhm.
some people don't, and they need to have a Peter experience. But most of us really live on the deficit side of life,
Yeah.
and we don't believe, and I call it unbelieving believers. We
Mhm.
believe God, we want to
Mhm.
serve God, but we don't believe who God says we are,
Yeah.
and that's really the first step of becoming who God's really imagined us to be.
That's so good. Can you imagine if our world was filled with people who knew who God said they were?
Well, it's interesting because in Romans 8 it says that the whole creation is groaning and waiting in expectation for the revelation of the sons of God.
Mhm.
And this understanding of who we are is what what the universe is waiting for. And
Yeah.
and I really think when you think about what's happening, I mentioned this to you before
Mhm.
we started recording that about 25% of my invitations to be on podcasts come
Mhm.
from non-Christian definitely non-Christian
Yeah.
people, where I
Yeah.
can share the love of God and the image of God and identity, because the world is aware. When you think
Mm-hmm.
about self-identity, young people who self-identify,
Mm-hmm.
what is that?
Right.
It's the cry of our heart. I think it really is the call of God
Mm-hmm.
to become more than we think we are, and that's, again, I think God has called us. Again, the hope of his calling, what is that? His calling is definitely greater than I can ever imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to give the rest of my life just saying, God, I'm here.
Yes.
I want to be who you've made me to be.
Yes. I love it. And I love that, one of my favorite, I guess you could say, like, ages of people to see flourishing is like the 65 and above who
Hmm.
are told in the world that it's time to retire. And I get to say, no, 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 it's time to refire.
No,
So I love that
yeah.
you're like, so when did your first book launch?
Well, my first book launched about 10 years ago. And this, actually, the first book really changed me.
Okay.
I was doing some counseling and had some time on my hands, and I never understood the book of Ephesians. Not that I still do, but I
Yeah.
understand it more.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I'm just going to rewrite the book of Ephesians in my own language as Paul, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And the thing that really hit me, a number of things, but the large thing was really coming to an understanding that God is a relationship.
Hmm.
The Father and the Son and the atmosphere of the Spirit having this delightful, playful, purposeful, engaging. I can't get enough of your relationship, and
Hmm.
everything that He's done was to include, whether it's, you see the atom or the solar system, whether you
Hmm.
see the husband wife. I mean, to reflect this delightful relationship where we come to be known and to
Hmm.
know in relationship. And
Yeah.
so when I began to see that, it just began to change me. So that was about 10 years ago, and Whiff and Sachs published that. And
Okay.
then I thought I was done writing, and I had a friend say that he was praying that I'd continue writing, and I said, I don't think so, because it's a process, right?
Yeah.
But I had really, what I had in my heart was the story of Abraham, which
Hmm.
is the father of faith, which is the father of faith journey. And what
Hmm.
I've seen with Abraham, it really is about identity,
Hmm.
because he began his life as an unbelieving believer. God appeared to him, and he did things that we wish we would do. I mean, he left all. As best he could. He defeated armies. He built altars. He just did these amazing things. But then in Genesis 15, God appeared to him and said, Hey, Abraham, I'm your reward. He said, No, you're not, because I'm not who you said I am. I'm not a
Hmm.
father. And
Hmm.
God said, Well, come with me, Abraham. Look at the stars. And it was the moment when the seed was planted. It said
Yeah.
he believed God. And at this point, he was accounted righteous. So I think about righteousness, that we have such a narrow, small definition of righteousness, mean right with God. That's
Hmm.
not what happened here. He was already right with God. He wasn't
Hmm.
right with himself. And
Hmm.
so he believed that he was who God said he was. And that was the faith stage where we start out as unbelieving believers, until there's a moment in time where we're brought out under the stars. And maybe someone here is
Hmm.
brought out under the stars as we're talking. But then he went through another 13, 14 years
Right.
where it wasn't happening.
Right.
And so God appeared to him again and said, in Genesis, I think 17 or
Hmm.
19, where God encountered him again, say it's not going to be Ishmael. We're going to bless your mess.
Hmm.
God never rebuked him for trying in his own strength to do what God would only do in his. But he said
Yeah.
it's going to happen this way. And he said at that point he hoped against hope. And I think about Paul in Romans 4. Paul was really expressing his own heart, his own life. He interpreted what Abraham had to go through what he had to go through, hoping
Hmm.
against hope that he might become. And
Hmm.
so that's where most of us are, and that's where such a precious time where we're struggling to be something we're not, and then we come to the end of ourselves, and then God finally does it. But
Hmm.
the high point of his life was not having Isaac.
Hmm.
You'd think that the period would be put around Isaac's name, behind Isaac's name, because here it was, here's my
The
baby.
promise. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, it happened on Moriah. And James says that this thing where he was accounted righteous was fulfilled in Moriah. So what happened on Moriah was God basically asked Abraham for all physical evidence of his fatherhood, of his personhood, to
Mhm.
see, do you really know who you are? And
Mhm.
Abraham said, I know who I am. It doesn't matter whether I have a son or not a son. I know who I
Mhm.
am.
Mhm.
And right after that, God said, now surely I'll bless you. You know who you are. Externals aren't going to affect you one
Mhm.
way or the other. And that's where God wants to bring all of us, where we're not affected by externals, whether
Yeah.
someone likes us or doesn't like us, whether
Yes.
the sun's shining or the sun is hidden. You
Yeah.
know, we're living from within, right? We're
Mhm.
living from within, and
Mhm.
we're being that person that God has created us to be. But we have to go through the process, and
Yeah.
if we don't see the process, we're going to misinterpret life. And
Mhm.
and I don't think, I think that story of Abraham is there because God wants us to be unbelievably significant
Mhm.
and our worth. And I believe for myself, that my significance is as great as Abraham
Mm.
because I'm his son. I'm
Yeah.
Abraham's child, and Paul writes in Galatians that the gospel was pre-preached to
Mhm.
Abraham. And what was the gospel? In
Mhm.
you shall all the nations of the earth be blessed.
Mhm.
So who's living in me? It's Jesus. And so
Right.
in me, through me, all
Yeah.
the nations of the earth will be blessed. And we've seen that with our family.
Mhm.
God's really been, we were actually going to have a great grandchild soon. And
Oh,
we see
congratulations.
our kids walking with the Lord. I know I'm planting seeds in people that I
Mhm.
know are going to come
Yes.
forth. Yeah.
Yeah. It's such a beautiful walk, isn't it? Challenging at times, but
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
beautiful. Like
Yeah.
going through that process. Gosh. Well, this has been such a wonderful time together today. I would love, again, could you just share the name of your book? Is it available like on
Yeah.
Amazon and all the places?
So really, if you go to my website,
Okay.
tomanderson.in, IN for Indiana,
Okay.
Anderson, I have my blog on there.
Okay.
The message I gave at church on identity, which is after the first 2 minutes, I haven't spoken in front of people like that for a while. So, but
Yeah.
it's really good.
So good.
It's who you are. It's who you
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
But and then if they want to ask me questions or say, "Hey, you're stupid," I mean that they can do that too.
Yeah, so go to your website
Yeah,
and I'll be sure to put all of Tom's contact information in the show notes and a link to his book as well. Well, as we close today, I would love for you to share just if there's any other words of encouragement you'd like to share with the one who's listening in. I do
yeah.
this for the one. And then would you pray us out today?
I sure would. So, two things. First, I think we mentioned this already. I think the best posture that you can have, whether you're an unbeliever or a believer, is
Hmm.
God, I don't get it.
Hmm.
God, open my heart. This, what you're saying is so not my language. I need to have you really show me. I think that,
Hmm.
and that's the prayer God is going to answer without a doubt. It might
Hmm.
not be tomorrow, but you keep saying, God, I'm here, I'm before you, I need you. And the other thing is, it is finished. I
Hmm.
think the gospel is, it is finished. God has already wrapped up your life in a package with a nice big bow, and
Hmm.
he's going to be unwrapping that. But we have to. He looks at everything from the end. From the end, he sees the finished product and works from that to that point. And
Hmm.
so, just begin to see your life as, if there's conflict in your marriage, if there's things that are not going on, says God is finished. Lord is
Yeah.
finished, and I can rest in you.
So good. Thank you. Wow. Well, would you pray us out today?
Yes,
Would
I would
love
love
for you to
to.
do that if you'd be open to that.
Yeah, yeah. So, Lord, I just want to say we're here. Not sure who's all listening, but God, just want to say we're here. We
Mhm.
just present ourselves before you and just want to say, Lord, that we're all clueless, Lord.
Yeah.
We don't have a clue. And would you please open our hearts
Mhm.
to see the good news, Lord,
Mhm.
that you really do have your hand on us. You really do love us in a way that would make us blush if we saw it, Lord. And Father, would you really work that in the hearts of people, that we begin to see the relational God, not this moral God, not this God who just sits on the throne. Lord, you'd rather get off the throne and wash our feet than sit on the throne, Lord. And so it's this God we come to, and this God we call on. And Lord, in Jesus' name, we're praying this. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Tom, for coming on today, and thank you for being a brave voice who's setting many free. I will be back with another episode next week. Thanks, listeners. Bye.